أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. So dear brothers and sisters, tonight we want to cover some very important questions regarding the Anbiya and the path of the Anbiya. Practical questions with practical implications. Some questions are tough to ask, but they need to be asked. The question that we want to think about is this. Well, several questions. I'll just mention the questions in the beginning and then we'll go over the questions one at a time. When the Anbiya and the prophets would start their mission, right, and they would try to bring reform to this world, would they be successful? Were they successful? Were they successful collectively? Were they successful individually? And then if they were successful, what were the factors that led to their success? If they were defeated, then what were those factors that led to them being defeated? So what happens is that we learn the prophets came here and they had a very lofty goal. The job of the Anbiya was that they were going to come and they were going to teach us fundamental teachings in order to make us experience God's best. So the prophets came to teach us brotherhood, that we're all brothers. We're all made by one Creator. The prophets came to eradicate injustice, to take away ignorance, to take away poverty. The prophets came for these reasons. They came to teach us that there should not be one part of the society which is more privileged than the other. Certain people have certain rights, oppressed and the oppressors, that society be divided in that way. The prophets were here to take people from those beliefs. Now what happens though, and then the other thing that we know about the prophets is this: once they began their missions, once they got the bi'tha and they started their mission, there will be no rest for that prophet. Right? He wouldn't be able to get a good night's sleep. His days of relaxation were over. The prophet would continually be doing his jihad day and night, struggling to try and go over and bring mankind to the promised land. Now, and knowing this and knowing that the prophets came with a religion which according to you and I was also the religion of the fitrah, right? It's in line with what Allah put in us. Then why is it that we see the prophets with this wonderful mission, lofty goals here for mankind? We see that some of the prophets were martyred. Many prophets were martyred. We have stories of prophets who were sawed in half. Nabi Zakaria, remember his story. Or Nabi Yahya, the head is taken off and offered to the king, right? Prophets dying far away from their homelands. Misery, right? So then a question might come to somebody's mind, and that is that, were they all defeated? Did they all? Because you don't see, none of us have heard. We've heard the story of the prophets. You don't hear about a prophet having a mansion or a palace, right? Or after he retired, you know, like worldly figures, political figures. When you retire, you're no longer the president. You have a guaranteed 6-figure salary. You have bodyguards, speaking engagements, right? But when you look at the story of the Anbiya, you see jihad, 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 and then poverty, and then these kind of things, right? So now with this thing, what are we supposed to believe about the prophets? In general, collectively, and then also individually. Now remember this, the tyrants, there are some people, either simple-minded people. The answer to these questions, there has practical implications. For tyrants, tawaghit, they would like us to believe that, yeah, when you look at the world, you see nothing but the rule of kufr and those corrupt powers. Every time truth came, it was silenced, it was quashed. They would like us to believe in that way. And some mu'mineen might also believe that. Right? They might believe that. But what we're going to do is we're going to try and do something else. We're going to make a bold claim from the beginning, and then after that we have to see if we can prove this bold claim. The bold claim that we want to make from the very beginning is this, that the prophets were successful. They were successful. Actually, no one, if you look at the followers of the prophets or even the rest of mankind, our claim is going to be this: no one was as successful as the prophets. They were very successful. They did their mission. They did that. But we still need to know this though. Okay, well, individually were they successful? Collectively were they successful? How do we say this? Right? So as normal, what we normally do is we want to back up these things with verses from the Quran. Right? We're learning our aqaid and our beliefs, but we want to look at from the Quran and we want to be able to learn these things. And there's practical implications. Right? Because there's many things to learn in this world. Right? Sometimes you go sessions, seminars, and people teach you things, all kind of things. There's information out there. But all of that information is not beneficial. Right? Some things there are ilm, but they're not mufid. They're not beneficial. For instance, let's say you and I, we know how much the world weighs. How heavy is the world? That's knowledge, right? But will that get us closer to paradise? Will that bring the Imam back? No, it's just knowledge. These answers though, inshallah, we'll see that they not only do they provide us with beneficial knowledge, but they put a burden on our shoulders. There's some duties we're supposed to do. If we find out certain secrets about the prophets and the Anbiya and the way of the Anbiya, then it's going to put certain burdens on our shoulders. So the first one we'll start off with was, what was the gift of the Anbiya to mankind? What did they do? What did they start off with? We're starting from Nabi Adam, right, up until Khatam. What did they do? What was their job? What was their mission? When we look at the prophets collectively, so this is the first answer is going to be about the job of the Anbiya collectively, all together. What were they doing? The prophets took human beings who were in a very rough situation. Human beings in the beginning of time, you could say, were like a beast. Human beings were. A lot of the teachings that were supposed to be there came later for human beings. So what the prophets did was to take, I'll give you an example first. Let me give you an example. Imagine that you have a teacher, and this teacher is working with students who are ignorant, unruly, uncivilized, vicious, right? And the teacher wants to bring these guys to being cultured and educated, and right? He's working with these guys. The first teacher takes this group of students, we'll just say one student for right now, and this guy is dim. He's slow, he doesn't get it, right? But the teacher works and he tries and he struggles and he pushes, and eventually this guy who knew nothing, was like completely out there, he gets him to the first grade, right? The teacher though may die during this period of time. It was such a struggle to get this guy to the first grade. He got him there with difficulty, with effort, pushing, but he got him there. But the teacher passed. Then the next teacher comes. The next teacher begins his struggle, working with the same group of people, pushing, teaching, educating, difficulty. He gets them to the second grade. Third teacher, fourth teacher, right? Now, when you look back at these teachers, it's true the teachers have passed. They're no longer with us, right? The teachers, I said each year the teacher would die. But when you look back at the teachers and look at those students who've undergone this training, if you look back now that the students are in the 10th grade, and you look back and compare them to where they first started, where they didn't even know the alphabet, you'd say that actually the teachers were successful. Why? Because the students have progressed. The students now know things. I mean, it's true they're in the 10th grade now, but overall they benefited. And what was the goal of the teacher? The goal of these teachers was to get the students to learn, to get culture, to know their responsibilities. So in this way, when we zoom back out at the effort, it's true. Right now, the teachers aren't here. Many of these teachers didn't even see what happened, right? They never lived to see the end result of what their efforts would bring. But that goal that they had, the things they were trying to teach, those things were taught. So in that way, we can say definitely that the teachers were successful. Now, again, if we compare this, mankind, right? We say that mankind in the beginning, unruly, unworthy students with great difficulty and the teachers are trying to teach them. Let's say it was even worse than that, than the first example I gave. Let's say the students in the first grade, they rebelled and they even attacked the teacher and they killed the teacher. Right? They made him a martyr. Sometimes the Anbiya, there was some issue they raised up, the third grade or the second grade, some issue came up and then the students rebelled, right? The teachers have been passing, right? They've been martyred, they're dying, poverty, misery, these things, but the mission is continuing, right? The mission that was there of the Anbiya to get these teachings out there, that's been happening. So the Anbiya were like that. They were these teachers. They were mu'allams. And they would take mankind, because the way that God desired was that mankind gradually and naturally absorb these teachings and make that move towards perfection. Right? Make that move towards being Khalifatullah. Right? So when we look, we see that now, looking at the world right now. The world right now is more ready to accept the word of Islam and the truth of Islam than it was when the prophets began their mission that many years ago. Then if we look back 1,000 years ago, how ready is the world, mankind? Because we're not only looking at believers. How ready is the world now to accept the teachings of Islam, to be able to implement the Quran, as compared to the world 1,000 years ago? 1,000 years ago, we were in a much worse situation. The world globally, mankind globally. Now there are certain conversations that you and I can have with people. Remember, teachings of the Anbiya have become mainstream now. For instance, you have, I don't want to connect the dots for you guys, but sometimes it's good to think about how these things connect with current events, okay? Right now, for instance, to openly say someone is a racist, openly to say that I proclaim that that's not acceptable, right? Even the president was over there. He said, I'm the least racist person you will meet. Right? You can't, it's not a value one can just openly say and express, right? The idea of another teaching of the Anbiya, right? These are what we learn from our scholars. What we say, the teachings of the Anbiya is this: mankind should have a role in determining their political future. Instead of there just being a strong man who decides, a dictator, right? Back in the day, we've had dictators, we've had kings, we've had blue blood, right? Maybe it's still there in England, but generally, people say, well, there should be a democracy, even if it's fake democracy. We should have a role, we should vote people out, right? People should be equal under the law. Again, you and I, we're not gonna quibble over, okay, well, how equal or how fair is the justice system here in America? That's something else. But the idea, the concept, the teaching of the Anbiya, that people should all be equal under the law, right? These teachings became mainstream. So it's not that there was no effort or that none of the teachings of the Anbiya were grasped by mankind. No, mankind has grasped them, and now they're more ready. And if you compare the state of the world again, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, again you see progress, meaning that we're closer now. Now, if you say, well, when Imam Mahdi comes, what's it going to be like? Right? The Imam of the time. The Imam of the time, let's remember, when the Imam of the time came, when he was born, he was supposed to be that individual. We said the Anbiya, their job was to get mankind to perfection, to ta'ali, to get to that stage that they're going to accept God and move towards God, right? Imam Mahdi was supposed, when he was first born, he had been prophesied, he's going to bring the one to take mankind to the pinnacle, to take mankind to the end, right? But the world was not ready for a revolutionary Imam at that time. If Imam Mahdi tried to rise up at that time and take the world to the end, he would have definitely been defeated. The world wasn't ready. Definitely, without a doubt, the world wasn't ready. So what happens is, but now the world's becoming more ready. Now again, for us, you and I, we don't know when the Zuhur will be. We don't know. It could be 10 years from now. It could be 10,000 years from now. We don't know. We hope it's soon. We expect that it's soon. I mean, you've heard the words of the leader. It gives us energy. We're thinking, inshallah, we will witness it. Inshallah. But we don't know that. But what we can say is this. When the dhuhur happens, mankind is going to be ready for God and the words of God. All of those things that mankind needs to accept perfection and move towards God, those are going to be there. And by the way, when you look at the struggle that the Anbiya have been through over all of these years, from the time of Adam, how they've been working with mankind, they've been trying to get us to a super highway. Right? Get us through this difficult way, pushing, teaching, struggling, working with us to get us to the super highway, and then life takes off. It's not that when Imam comes in, life just ends, it's Qiyamah, it's over. Right? Then we start moving towards God. Then we start experiencing that paradise on earth. The kingdom of God that all of the prophets have been pushing for, we're going to experience it then. And then you'll see it is going to be amazing what we're capable of doing, how close we're getting to God. Right? Mankind will witness that day where there is no dhulm, there is no oppression, there is no subjugation. That's going to happen. But what brought us there? It was the teachings of the Anbiya. It was their mission, their works, their efforts. Right? So, in that way, the first conclusion, which is an important one, what we want to come to, is the idea that yes, the Anbiya were successful collectively. Right? Their mission was to teach mankind and get mankind ready, get mankind to the 10th grade or to the 12th. They were able to do that. It's going to continue. The work has to continue, and inshallah, mankind will be ready eventually, but they were successful. Now, because I like to mention some verses, there's other verses, but I'll just mention some of the verses of the Quran, again, for us to look at these verses, and then after that, to examine them and then see if we can learn certain lessons from them. So, that first point that I made was the idea that some of the tyrants would like to have us believe that the Anbiya were not successful, right? They'd like us to believe that. The idea that it doesn't make any difference. The more you try, the effort you give, nothing's going to happen. Just like the prophets, they themselves were defeated, you'll be defeated. They'd like us to believe that. But what we do believe is this: although there were efforts by batil, right, falsehood, right, the reality of what God wanted to happen did happen. The victories were there and they were remaining. So the example that the Quran gives us, let me give you the Quranic example. The Quran gives us an example, two examples. When it comes to Allah talking about truth and falsehood, haqq and batil. One of the examples that Allah gives us is the example of flowing water flowing down from the mountains and going into the riverbeds. And then God explains that when you see the water, you also see foam. You see those waves, you see these things, right? But don't worry about the foam. The foam goes, the water remains. That's one of the examples. The other example that God gives us is the example of when you take metal, right? You're going to form gold, an ornament. You're going to fashion an ornament, right? You take it in the fire. Again, that not foam, you don't have that, but the froth forms, that goes, but what remains, what's beneficial remains. Okay? So that example in the Quran, if we don't mind, we'll look at that one is another one that's directly about the path of the Anbiya. So this first one is Surah 13, and verse number 17. Surah 13, verse number 17, again, collectively, what did the prophets do? So God says this, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم أنزل من السماء ماء. God sends down water from the heavens. فصالت أودية بقدرها. So then after that, these riverbeds, they filled up according to their measure. فاحتمل السيل زبدا رابيا. Then after that, the water, this flowing water, it came, or the torrent, you can say, it carries a swelling froth, right? The kath, they say in Farsi, the bubbles or these things, you see that's there, right? Then God gives us another example. He says, وَمِمَّا يُوقِدُونَ عَلَيْهِ فِي النَّارِ ابْتِغَاءَ حِلْيَةٍ أَوْ مَتَاعٍ زَبَدٌ مِثْلُ ذَلِكَ. And from which they kindle in the fire, seeking ornaments or pleasure, is a froth like unto it. Right? So the first one was the water, and the next one those metal elements. Both times it's that froth there. Then God continues. He says this, كَذَلِكَ يَضْرِبُ اللَّهُ الْحَقَّ وَالْبَاطِلِ. This way God also gives this example of haqq and batil, truth and falsehood. He says, فَأَمَّا الزَّبَدُ فَيَذْهَبُ جُفَاءً. That froth that's there, that goes, that disappears. He says, وَأَمَّا مَا يَنْفَعُ النَّاسِ فَيَمْكُثُ فِي الْأَرْضِ. But that which is beneficial for the people remains in the earth. كَذَلِكَ يَضْرِبُ اللَّهُ الْأَمْثَالِ. And in this way Allah sets forth parables. So that effort is there. On the outside we see, that is very apparent, the froth part. But what really remains is what's beneficial to mankind, those teachings and these things. That's one of the verses. Another verse, again there's other verses, is from Surah 37 and verses number 171 and 173. Surah 37. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. This one's directly talking about the prophets. It says, وَلَقَدْ سَبَقَتْ كَلِمَتُنَا لِعِبَادِنَا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. For indeed our word had already gone forth to the messengers. Right? This was already said. God did this. The messengers, this word was out there. Our word had already gone through to the messengers. What did God teach the messengers? إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمَنْصُورُونَ. Definitely, indeed, the prophets are going to be assisted. وَإِنَّ جُنْدَنَا لَهُمُ الْغَالِبُونَ. Our host, our armies, those are definitely going to be victorious. So God promised victory to the Anbiya, and collectively as a group, when we look at their mission, the prophets were successful. They were able to get mankind closer to that goal. Now, the next one's even a more important question and more touchy, and also it has the practical results. Collectively, we may say that yes, the prophets were victorious. They were able to get mankind closer and closer to that individual goal, or to that goal that they had. But what do we say about the prophets individually? Were the prophets victorious individually? And if they were victorious, under what circumstances were they victorious? If they weren't victorious, when is it that the prophets weren't victorious? We're going to learn a principle. And this principle is important for all of you and myself, us as believers to know, as followers of the Anbiya, as followers of the Prophet, and also to share with other people. When were the prophets, when was it that a prophet would start his mission? So, as a question, and again, keep that historical reality in mind, that you and I, or other people outside of the circle of Islam, they would say that, look, when we see the prophets, poverty, misery, prophets are defeated, prophets are martyred, right? Whenever they start their work, then they're not, when is it that you've seen that a prophet was successful? Give me an example. When were they able, eventually Batil came, Batil took down the prophets, and the prophets lost. There's a point they're wanting to get from this, by the way. The point that they want to get from is that there's no benefit to resist. There's no benefit. If the prophets couldn't do it, think about it in this way. If Nabi Nuh, and he was ma'soom, and he pushed and he tried and he did everything, if he couldn't do it, then you're going to do it? Yahya couldn't do it. Zachariah couldn't do it. Then you and I, who are we? Right? And by the way, the tyrants love to push these kind of ideas. Part of the propaganda of the tyrants in the media, in the movies, social media, is this idea that you can't resist, that you're going to collapse. Even if you and I look in more immediate times, right? There's always this idea that those who are resisting, they're about to fail, they're about to collapse. For you, some of us, if you remember, there was these protests in Iran recently, all over the news. What's happening? Iran's falling apart, right? Or for those of us who remember a little further back to the 33-day war, what's going to happen, right? The idea of the propaganda machine is that you can't do it, you can't resist. And by the way, this idea of putting this idea of fear of failure, or that we're going to collapse, that's not new. Let me show you a historical reality. There was the Taghut at the time of Imam Sadiq. His name was Al-Mansur. Right? He's the second of the Abbasid caliphs, and he was the most powerful. Right? He was a ruthless, a monster. Now what happened with this guy, who's the second but most powerful of their khulafa, during his time, rebellion started. They weren't happy with him. They were rising up. They're trying to fight. And there was two brothers who were fighting back. Right? Shias, good guys who were fighting back. Known as An-Nafsu Zakiyya. One of them, Muhammad, was known as Nafsu Zakiyya. Ibrahim was his brother. Anyhow, these individuals were fighting. And they were struggling against him. And the Khalifa, although he was so powerful, he wasn't able to stop them. Right? They were giving him a lot of trouble. So he started, and he's a powerful Khalifa, he started spreading rumors, right? To show how powerful he was and try and crush this rebellion. One of the rumors was this, because these guys went into hiding. Right? They went into hiding, they were moving from here and there. He's created a rumor, you might look this up online, about Mansur having a magic mirror. You know, the same way that I'm going to give you the examples nowadays. Yeah, he has a magic mirror. And the magic mirror, if he looks into that mirror, he knows where An-Nafsu Zakiyya, his brother, he knows where they are. And if you're caught and they're hiding in your house, woe be on you. Right? He's giving this message out there. So people be terrified. But eventually they ended up killing these individuals, right? But the thing was that the Khalifa wasn't able to do that. So they went over the rumors, right? Nobody can stand against me. If anybody stands up, if anybody rises up, they're going to be destroyed. And then now, modern times, right? The idea with one of the things that comes across in the movies, they know everything. They're listening. If you do anything, they're taking pictures of, right? The idea that they all-seeing eye, right? To terrify the mu'mineen. At that time, the idea was, because these people only had a few Shia who joined them, who wrote. The idea was to get those Shia not to join the movement. Right? Why would they do all of that tabligh? To get people to believe the propaganda, there's no benefit to resisting. So the tyrants have always been there. Now, the second question though. So what's the question? Individually though. Collectively, alhamdulillah, the prophets, they were victorious. Individually, when were the prophets victorious and when were they defeated? This one goes back to the human will and our role. There were two conditions. Whenever these two conditions were there, the prophets would be successful. Outwardly, they would be victorious. Right? There were conditions for the followers, by the way. Two conditions. Whenever the followers had these conditions, outwardly the prophets would be victorious. Whenever the followers didn't have these conditions, you would see that the prophet would be killed. It's the same thing for the imams, by the way. Whenever the imam had followers who had these two conditions, the imam would be victorious. When they weren't there, so what are those two conditions? And again, we're going to look in the Quran, right, to see what these conditions are. A summary is this. The first condition is true iman, true faith, belief. Whenever the followers, the prophets, they already have iman. The followers of the prophets, they had true faith. And we've defined true faith before. We said true faith is first an intellectual realization. I'm intellectually convinced that Islam is the truth. The Quran is literally the word of God. Intellectually, I'm convinced. Secondly, faith is not something that stays in the heart. Faith is something that has to be demonstrated in my actions. I can't just claim, oh, I'm a follower, I believe, but I don't do any action. That can't be there. And the last one, which was the trickiest one, and the one that's been dogging us from the time of the Ahlul Bayt up until now, is picking and choosing when it comes to faith. True faith, true iman has those three conditions. If somebody's picking and choosing, part of Islam I like, part of Islam, they're not, again, not mu'min. We covered that before, right? So the first condition that had to be there was iman. The followers had to have iman. Then there's another condition. The second condition that needed to be there is, in the words of the Quran, sabr, patience. But patience, we're going to define what patience means, because sometimes people think of patience as in, well, I'm patient, I sit back, I put my hands, I twiddle my thumbs, and I'm patient, I wait until something happens, right? That's not patience. For us, patience is when you don't abandon the field. When things get hairy, Right? You're on the mission of the Anbiya, when things get difficult, to continue to do one's responsibility. It's easy right now. Right? But when being a follower of the Anbiya demands something, and it gets difficult, at that time, not to have a panic attack, to abandon our responsibilities, that kind of patience when it's there, and I'm going to give you the example, right? And it's true for all of things. So when the Imam, if you see the times when they were defeated by the Taghut of the time, it's because the followers didn't have this. Right? If they were victorious, the followers had this. So, Quran. The first one is Surah 3, verse number 139. So Surah 3, Al Imran, and verse number 139. And again, we've already passed this level of being intellectually convinced. Now when we hear an ayah of Quran, that's it. There's many verses to support this, but this is one. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. The Quran starts off in this way. وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. Don't be weak. وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. And do not grieve. وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ. And you are victorious. You have the upper hand. You are the winner, right? أَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ. What's the condition though? إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. In kuntum mu'minin. Definitely you're going to be victorious. Don't grieve, don't be weak. Keep pressing forward. In kuntum mu'minin. If you're believers. Right? So what happens is, these same conditions, by the way, because again, a question will come up. What about Imam Sadiq? Right? He went against the Taghut of the time. Right? And the Imam ended up being martyred. What happened to him? His followers. The followers of the Imam. They didn't have that sabr that they needed, that patience that they needed. They didn't have that belief that they needed. And Imam called them same thing. Right? Any Imam was defeated, it's the goes back, because outward defeat came back to the people. Right? We're not expecting, brothers and sisters, this is what the thing we have to, we don't need, the followers of the Anbiya, in order to become victorious, they don't need mu'jizah. Right? The lazy way of thinking of it is that it's no benefit in resisting. You can't resist. There's no benefit if you stand up. No way can stand up against these tyrants. They have the money. They have the weapons. They have everything. You're going to be defeated. Unless, of course, God has a miracle. Right? So then we can sit back and just wait for the miracle to happen. We don't need a miracle. If there's sabr, sabr will produce those miracles. If the believers resist and have patience, those miracles will be produced. Through their sabr. They don't need that God sends fire and thunderbolts from the heavens, right? So what we don't want to do is we don't expect this. Our expectation, brothers and sisters, is not this. That Imam Sadiq, for instance, I gave his example, that he's going to be victorious and it'll be against the divine norm, just by miracles, right? If that was the case, then God would have sent miracles. Right? How come Imam Sadiq didn't win? Right? If all we needed was miracles, if God's way of doing was miracles, that's not God's way. Right? Naturally, we're going to go through this process, and the idea will be that iman and that sabr has to be there. Right? The believers in the time of the Prophet, they did have that absolute faith. Some of the stories in the beginning of Islam, they're hard for us to think about repeating now. Remember for the Battle of Badr? For the Battle of Badr, can you imagine fighting a war in the month of Ramadan? For some people, even fasting in the month of Ramadan is challenging. Right? Fighting a war, going to face your enemies. Remember the Battle of Badr? You know how many swords we had in the Battle of Badr? I think 12. 12 swords. The other mu'mineen had sticks. Going against Abu Jahl, and remember the army that was there at the time. But the believers had that unshakable faith. Right? Remember when they were digging the trench, the time of Ahzab, right? Or even I mentioned for the Battle of Tabuk. We talked about these things. Remember the believers, and you and I would have been with them, walking 500 miles in the summer, leaving your jobs and your homes, right? Because it was time to pick. They were the farmers, these guys. Time to pick your dates. No, we don't do that. We're going to march in armor 500 miles to face who? The Romans. 10 believers sharing one camel. Right? They will go and, right? Under those kind of circumstances, yes, if the believers would have iman and have faith, then yes, Allah would grant that victory. So that was there. But now I want to, again, another verse to again establish this point. One of the verses is Surah Baqarah, and it's verse number 153. So 153. God teaches us in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, so O you who believe, He says, Ista'inu bis-sabr. Seek help through patience. Ista'inu bis-sabri was-salah. Inna Allah ma'as-sabirin. If God is with you, then nobody can defeat you. God is with you. So now, sabr, as I said, that's the thing that will give us the dunya and the akhirah, give us victory over enemies. I want to give you another example. This one, right, is we're going to go to the story of Musa and Fir'aun. There's an important lesson that we have to learn from the life of Musa and Fir'aun. This story is in Surah 7, and it starts in verse number 103. The rest of the story, the verses that I'm going to mention, brothers and sisters, are going to be verses number 126 and 127. Summary or context of what was happening in the story. If you remember the story, Musa is being sent to go and deal with Pharaoh. Musa. He goes to invite Pharaoh. He's trying to bring Pharaoh to the truth. Pharaoh rejects. The plan that's made is that we're going to undo the mu'jiza of Musa, the miracle of Musa, by calling the magicians. The magicians came, they tried to undo the miracle, the magicians became Muslims. Did Pharaoh back down? No. After that, when Pharaoh made this move, right, Pharaoh's rejecting the mission of the Anbiya, he's threatening Musa. And then after that, he decides to act with extreme prejudice against the believers. This is now the crux of the story. Right? So Musa comes over, he undoes his things, he's inviting, and then after that, Pharaoh decides to act with extreme prejudice against the believers. This is now verse number 126. Let's see what happens. وَقَالَ الْمَلَأُ مِنْ قَوْمِ. So this is Surah 7, verse number 126. وَقَالَ الْمَلَأُ مِنْ قَوْمِ فِرْعَوْنَ. So the Mala, the elite from the people of Fir'aun, they told Fir'aun this, or they said this, أَتَذَرُ مُوسَى وَقَوْمَهُ لِيُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Do you leave Musa and his people that they create corruption in the land, fasad in the earth? وَيَذَرَكَ وَآلِهَتَكَ. And they leave you and abandon you and your gods? Pharaoh said, no, I'm not going to let that happen. He now says, I'm going to use extreme prejudice against these guys. قَالَ سَنُقَتِّلُ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ. We're going to slaughter all of their youth. Right, we're going to up the ante. We're going to slaughter all of their youth. وَنَسْتَحْيِي نِسَاءَهُمْ. And we're going to leave their women alive. وَإِنَّا فَوْقَهُمْ قَاهِرُونَ. And we are above them dominant. Right? So think about that. Remember, Pharaoh is somebody who's saying he's God. The impaler. He's also known as the impaler. Somebody who, remember, he killed his wife. How he killed his wife. I mean, had that stone cast. Right? So this guy is, he believes he's God. This person says that I'm going to kill all of the kids off, all the youth off. So what happened is, these kind of situations are situations that make the brave people falter. When the tyrant comes over and he says, I'm going to kill off everybody, the ultimate punishment, even the brave start to falter. But actually, this is the time for the followers of the Anbiya to get stronger. The time when the threats come, that actually is the time to get stronger. There's a principle for us to keep in mind. This principle applies to us as a group, as a nation, if there was a nation that believed in this principle, or even as an individual. What we have to do is this. We set out goals for ourselves. We're going to achieve, in order to achieve success, right? We start to push in a certain direction. When we start to push in a certain direction, at first, when we make our projections and these things, we think that victory was going to be ours. We can do this. Then after that, then the difficulty, the hardship comes. Now people start to shake. They're not sure if they can continue. If we can have sabr at this stage and keep pushing at this stage, brothers and sisters, you get to a stage where you feel that literally there's no benefit. It's still your responsibility, but you get to that stage that you look, there's no way to do this. There's no way. If we can push through that time when it's impossible, then the help comes. Right? If the believers can continue, even when things look difficult and then look impossible, they can continue to have sabr, and that proper meaning, and resist. So when Pharaoh announced that, when Pharaoh came up with this idea that I'm going to slaughter everybody, it's going to get worse than you ever imagined, I'm going to tear you apart. At this time, Musa used this strategy. Instead of the believers, their job was not to panic at this stage. Now was the time to actually believe that no, we're going to be able to make it. What was Musa's strategy? So Musa speaks next, the next verse. قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ. Musa spoke to his people. إِسْتَعِينُوا بِاللَّهِ وَاصْبِرُوا. Ista'inu, seek help with Allah. Wasbiru, patience. Innal arda lillah. The land belongs to Allah. Yurithuha man yasha'u min ibadih. God grants this as inheritance. He bequeaths this to whoever He pleases from His servants, right? And we're His servants. We're the mu'mineen. Wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen. And the end result is for the pious. So what happens is, this was the way of the Anbiya, right? Ibrahim alayhi salam, he resisted, he was being thrown in the fire, right? He still resisted, he kept pushing, and then after that, eventually Allah gave him the tawfiq, he made the Kaaba. Right? He was able to establish the effects of his work were able to last for centuries. Musa, he resisted, and later on, after resisting under those terrible times, and later he's the same person who gives the command to his people to enter the promised land, right? Again, let me see that. Or our prophet, right? 13 years, unbelievable pressure. He resisted, and later Medina being able to establish this. So the principle, brothers and sisters, is mentioned in Surah 3, verse number 125. God says this, وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا. Right? Sabr and taqwa, if those two are there, right? Whenever those two are there, then that's when the victory comes. So brothers and sisters, inshallah, we hope that Allah gives us that sabr, that taqwa, that iman, and that we're able to do these things. Now, if there are any questions, then definitely I'll take those questions. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah.